Vivid verses.
I knew something was wrong the morning Cassandra started being kind to me again. Not warm. Cassandra had never really been warm, not in the way that caused something. This was a different register entirely. Studied, patient, the kind of kindness that has an agenda dressed up in cashmere. She made coffee without being asked, set the mug beside my elbow while I read, and touched my shoulder on the way past in a way that landed like punctuation on a sentence I hadn't started yet. I noticed, and I said nothing. That's a skill I've had since I was a boy, the ability to receive information without telegraphing that I've received it. My grandfather called it still water. He said the fish always swam to the still part of the river. He wasn't wrong about much. I turned a page, drank the coffee, let her think the shoulder touch had landed as intended. We'd been struggling, Cassandra and I, for longer than either of us had admitted out loud. The marriage had reached that particular altitude where the air is thin and everything takes more effort than it used to. Conversations, proximity, the basic social maintenance of two people sharing a life. There wasn't ugliness between us. That almost would have been easier. There was just this slow, expensive quiet that neither of us seemed willing to break in the direction of honesty. She had her circle, her sister Blythe, her college friends who came through twice a year and took over the back patio with wine and a specific kind of laughter that stopped when I stepped outside. I had mine. We had, over time, conducted an orderly separation of everything except the legal fact of us. The house was mine, not ours mine, and she knew it. Technically, emotionally, and in every document that had ever been filed anywhere, the property and the trust attached to it flowed from my grandfather's estate to me alone. I had been careful about that. Not paranoid, just careful. My grandfather had been a deliberate man who built things to last, and I had taken that seriously in a way that Cassandra had always found slightly tedious. She called it being attached to the past. I called it understanding what you actually have. The shift in her behavior had started about 6 weeks before the morning with the coffee. I'd clocked the early signals, a certain attentiveness during dinners with her sister, a way of steering conversation toward the property, toward what the acreage might be worth now that the area had developed. Small questions delivered casually, the way a hand feels along a wall in the dark for a light switch. I answered each question simply, without elaboration, and watched her recalibrate. "Have you ever thought about what you'd do with this place if you didn't have it?" she asked one evening. We were outside. The sun was finishing its business behind the tree lean, and she had a glass of white wine and an expression that she thought looked idle. "No," I said. She smiled and let it go. But I saw the note she was making behind her eyes. I was too attached to the property to sell voluntarily. She filed that away. I filed away that she was asking. 3 weeks before the coffee morning, I had dinner with my friend Garrett. We go back to our mid-20s, Garrett and I. He's one of those rare people who will tell you something you don't want to hear without needing you to thank him for it. He works in finance, thinks in systems, and has a memory for details that makes him genuinely useful in the rare instances when I need a second set of eyes. We ate at his kitchen table, his wife Lena moving through the background with the comfortable self-sufficiency of someone who'd long ago decided that our conversations were not her concern. She's good people, Lena. She brought out bread without being asked and disappeared back into the house. "How's Cassandra?" Garrett said, in the tone that meant he already had information. "Thoughtful," I said. He turned his wine glass once. "Thomas Feld is representing her." I set my fork down, not from shock. The name had surfaced at the edge of my awareness 2 weeks prior, a mutual acquaintance mentioning it in a context that I hadn't fully parsed until this moment. Thomas Feld was a matrimonial attorney. Expensive, methodical, known for aggressive asset strategies in high-value divorce proceedings. "When did she retain him?" I asked. 6, maybe 7 weeks ago," Garrett said. The retainer cleared through a personal account she's been growing separately for about a year. A year. I ran that backward. Before things had gotten thin between us. Before, possibly, they were ever going to get better. She had been planning while we were still on the surface of functional marriage. She had looked at what I had, decided she wanted her portion of it, and gone to work. I didn't feel betrayed. I want to be accurate about that. What I felt was something cleaner, the specific clarity that comes when a question you've been carrying gets answered. The situation wasn't ambiguous anymore. It was just a situation. The trust. I said. Garrett nodded slowly. That's what Feld is building toward. Spousal claim on the inherited estate. He paused. Does she have a case? She thinks she does, I said. That's not what I asked. I picked up my fork again. No, she doesn't. My grandfather's name was Robert Calder, and he was a man who had watched enough families come apart over inherited land that he decided, decades before I existed, to build a wall around whatever he left behind. He didn't do it cruelly. He wasn't punishing future daughters-in-law or positioning himself as a patriarch controlling things from the grave. He did it because he understood that money and property, left undefended, become a reason for people to act against their natures. The trust he created when I was 19 and he was 73 was a quiet document. Its terms were specific and its language was dense enough that a casual reader, or an attorney reviewing it under time pressure while building a case, might miss what it actually contained. One clause in particular. I'd read that trust a dozen times since his death. Not because I was anxious, but because he'd asked me to. Know what you have. He told me once, the summer before I started university. We were on the back porch of the old house, both of us watching the same tree lean I still watch today. Not what it's worth, what it is. The clause was in section 7, subsection 4, and it was exactly 11 lines of legal text. In plain language, if any party initiated legal proceedings against the primary heir of the trust with the intent of claiming, subdividing, or compelling a transfer of trust assets, specifically including spousal claims filed in the context of marital dissolution, the initiating party forfeited, immediately and irrevocably, any claim or benefit they might otherwise have been owed. In other words, file against me, and the filing itself costs you everything. Grandfather had called it his still water clause, though not in the documents. He'd told me about it once, obliquely, in a way I hadn't fully understood until I was older. The trust takes care of itself, he'd said. All you have to do is not flinch. Cassandra's attorney was building a case to claim a share of something that would legally cease to be claimable the moment he filed. The aggressive move she was counting on to force my hand was the same move that would eliminate any leverage she had. She didn't know the clause existed. I hadn't told her. I want to be precise about my thinking in the weeks between Garrett's dinner table and the morning she filed. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't performing patience while secretly burning. I genuinely considered whether to tell her, not about the clause, but about the broader situation. Whether to sit down and say, I know what you're doing and I think we should stop. I turned it over from several angles. If I told her I knew about Feld, she would deny it, then adjust. She would look for another angle or a different timing. The conversation would cost me information without gaining me resolution. That was one calculation. If I simply waited, the clause would do what it was built to do. She would file, believing she was making a decisive, informed move. Her attorney would have prepared her for my potential responses, for negotiation, for a settlement fight. He would not have prepared her for the clause because he hadn't found it. And the moment the filing hit, it would be over. Not in the prolonged, expensive, grinding way that most of these situations end. Just over. The second calculation was cleaner. I'm not a cruel person. I want that on record, if only in my own accounting. There's a version of this story where I reach out a hand and say, let's stop, and she takes it, and we have a different, more humane ending. I believe that. I also believe she had retained an attorney a year ago, grown a separate financial account, allowed me to believe we might have a path forward while quietly preparing to take something that didn't belong to her. She had made her calculation. I made mine. I was in the study when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring through. 30 seconds later, it rang again from the same number. The second ring is always information. It means the person is not calling idly. I answered. Mr. Calder? The voice was professional, female, not young. This is Sandra Morse. I'm a paralegal with the Feld Group. I'm calling on behalf of. I know who you're calling on behalf of, I said. A brief pause. Your wife, Cassandra Calder, has authorized us to inform you that formal dissolution proceedings have been initiated as of this morning. You'll be receiving. I understand, I said. Thank you for the call. Another pause, longer this time. She had expected something else. Protest, questions, the usual intake of breath that comes before people start reacting. I gave her nothing, and the nothing clearly landed strangely. Mr. Calder, Mr. Feld's office will be reaching out to your. Ms. Morse, I said. I'll be in touch with my own counsel. I appreciate the call. I ended it. Set the phone face down on the desk. Looked out the window at the tree lean for a moment. There it is, I thought. The clock started. I wasn't happy. I want to be clear about that, too. There's a particular feeling when something you built or hoped for officially ends, and it isn't triumph, even when you've seen it coming. It's something quieter, closer to the feeling of setting down something heavy you've been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. I called my attorney, a careful and thorough man named Paul Strickland, who had handled the trust administration since my grandfather's death. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "The clause activates." "Yes," I said. "She doesn't know." "No. Her attorney hasn't found it." "Evidently not." Paul was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had the specific texture it gets when he's being precise. "Once I file the response and invoke the clause, it's done. There's no negotiating around it after the fact. She'll have no claim on any trust asset. She'll be entitled to what marital law provides on the non-trust property, which is—" "I know what it is," I said. A pause. "Do you want to wait?" "Give her a chance to withdraw the filing before." "How long would that take?" "I need to reach Feld's office. Get him to advise her." "She'd need to." "Paul," I said, "file the response." He filed it that afternoon. Cassandra was staying at her sister Blythe's house. She had moved a bag there 3 days prior. I'd watched her pack with the careful efficiency of someone who had packed in their mind many times before actually doing it. I hadn't said anything. There was nothing to say that would have changed the packing. I found out about the clause's effect not from Paul, but from Blythe, which I hadn't anticipated. She called me at 7:30 that evening. I was eating dinner alone at the kitchen table, which had a particular quality of silence I was still getting used to, and she opened with, "What did you do?" "I responded to a filing," I said. "Owen." Her voice had something in it I couldn't immediately categorize. Not anger, closer to the aftermath of it. Her attorney called her an hour ago. He was on the phone for 40 minutes. I could hear her crying through the wall. I set down my fork. "I'm sorry she's upset." "That's all you have to say?" "Blythe." I kept my voice even. "Your sister retained an attorney over a year ago. She built a separate account to fund a retainer. She initiated a legal action against an inherited estate, which activated a trust clause that removed any spousal claim the moment she filed. That's not something I did to her. That's the consequence of what she did." Silence on the line. She thought. Blythe started, then stopped. "She thought I wouldn't see it coming," I said. Not harshly, just as a statement of what was true. Or she thought she had a strong enough case that it didn't matter if I did. She was wrong on both counts. She has nothing now. She has what marital law provides on a non-trust property, I said. That's not nothing. It's less than she was planning for, but it isn't nothing. Owen, I'm sorry she's hurting, I said. I mean that. This isn't what I wanted the marriage to become. But she made a choice. The trust was designed to respond to exactly that choice. Blythe was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, something in her voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but more honest. She said you were too attached to that place. She wasn't wrong about that part, I said. I heard her exhale. I don't know who was worse to each other, she said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It was just what it was, a sister accounting for something she couldn't fully parse from the outside. Neither do I said, and that at least was honest. The meeting I hadn't anticipated came 9 days later. Paul had suggested it. Not a formal mediation, just a conversation between the four of us. Cassandra, her attorney, Paul, and me. Feld had requested it, which surprised me slightly. I had expected him to regroup, find another angle, look for pressure points elsewhere. Instead, he called Paul and asked for a sit-down. That told me something. Either he was positioning for the best possible outcome on the non-trust assets, which was sensible and professional, or Cassandra had asked him to arrange a meeting where she could see me. That second possibility I kept in the front of my mind when I walked into Paul's conference room on a Thursday morning. Paul's office is in a low building near the old part of town, wood paneling, good carpet, the smell of things that have lasted. The conference room has a long table, 8 chairs, and a window that looks out onto a parking lot, which somehow makes it easier to focus. Less to look at. Feld arrived first, which told me he wanted to establish himself before I entered. I noted it. He was in his 50s, compact, with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd sat across hundreds of tables like this one. He shook my hand and looked at me with the professional interest of a man recalibrating. He'd built his case around a client who he believed had a decisive advantage. Now he was in a room where that advantage had been eliminated by a clause he hadn't found. I didn't make him feel bad about missing it. There was nothing to be gained from that. Cassandra came in with Blythe, which I hadn't expected. Paul looked at me. I gave him a small nod. It's fine. Blythe sat against the wall, not at the table. Observer, not participant. She looked tired. Cassandra sat directly across from me and looked at the table first, then at Feld, then finally at me. I thought I was prepared for seeing her. I was mostly right. There was a moment, just a moment, when her face held everything the marriage had been at its better points, and that moment had weight. Then it passed, and what remained was the situation. Thank you for coming, Feld said. He addressed me specifically, which was another calibration, acknowledging that I was the party who had chosen, by filing the response, to end the negotiation before it had started. Of course, I said. He organized 2 folders in front of him without opening either. A habit. As you know, Mr. Calder, the trust clause invoked in your response to the filing has significantly altered the landscape of what we anticipated seeking. He paused, watching me. My client would like to understand, directly, whether there's any flexibility in your position. I looked at Cassandra, not Feld. She was watching me now. Her hands were flat on the table. The clause isn't my position, I said. It's the trust's response to the filing. I didn't choose for it to activate. She filed, and it activated. Those are just the facts. Feld nodded once. Understood. Then I'll ask it differently. He leaned forward slightly. Would you be willing to voluntarily extend any portion of what my client would have been entitled to outside the trust in an excess of marital property law as a gesture of equitable resolution? Cassandra's hands moved slightly on the table. This was what she'd asked him to ask. She was watching my face with an expression I recognized, the same look she'd had during our more serious conversations, the ones where she'd wanted something from me and was trying to determine if the wanting was going to cost her. I thought about it. Actually thought, because Feld's question deserved an actual answer and Cassandra's presence deserved honesty. The answer was no. Not from spite. Not from a satisfaction of having won something. But because the question was built on a false premise. She hadn't been denied something equitable. She had been denied the benefit of a legal action that was designed, from the start, to take something that wasn't hers. Her attorney was asking me to feel obligated to correct the outcome of a move she'd made deliberately, fully intending to use it against me. No, I said. Feld accepted it with professional composure. Cassandra's expression shifted. For a moment, something crossed her face that might have been relief. Relief that at least I was being direct, that the conversation was what it was and not dressed up in anything else. Or maybe I was reading that into her. Grief makes you generous with interpretations sometimes. Cassandra, I said, not unkindly. You hired Thomas 8 months before you filed. You spent a year preparing. You made a calculated decision that the best way to get what you wanted was to take it legally rather than to ask for it. I understand why. I'm not angry about it. I paused. But I'm also not going to feel responsible for the outcome of a decision you made deliberately. She looked at me. The table was between us, and the legal machinery was between us, and the year of separate planning and quiet surveillance was between us. She was still, in some way I couldn't stop noticing, the woman I'd married. That didn't change what was true. You knew, she said, the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was steady, which surprised me. Not about the filing date, I said. About 3 weeks before you filed, I knew the direction you were heading. And you didn't say anything. No. She absorbed that. Why not? It was a fair question. I gave it the time it deserved. Because you'd already decided, I said. Whatever I said in that conversation would have been information for you to use, not a chance for us to change course. That's not a criticism. It's just where we gotten to. Blythe, against the wall, was looking at the floor. You let me walk into it, Cassandra said. Not with heat. More like someone confirming a map. You walked into it, I said. I didn't set it up. My grandfather set it up 30 years ago because he understood that what he was leaving behind needed to be protected from exactly this kind of situation. I didn't engineer anything. I just didn't dismantle what he built. Feld, to his credit, said nothing. He was present in the room as a professional courtesy, not because there was anything left for him to do. Cassandra looked at the table for a long moment. Something was moving through her. I couldn't name it exactly, but it had the quality of someone setting something down. When she looked back up at me, there was something different in her eyes. Not warm, not hostile. Something more like recognition. Was it ever? She stopped. Restarted. Was there a point where you would have told me? If I'd come to you first, before Thomas, and said I wanted to leave, would you have been honest about what you had? The question landed cleanly, and I sat with it. Yes, I said. She nodded, slowly, as though that confirmed something she'd suspected but needed to hear. I didn't think you would be, she said. I thought you'd protect it no matter what, so I tried to get around you. A pause. I miscalculated. You did, I said. The agreement sat between us without weight. Just two people acknowledging the shape of a thing that had happened. Is there anything else either party needs to address? Paul said, measured and professional as always. Feld looked at Cassandra. She shook her head once. Then I think we have what we need, Paul said. Blythe caught me in the hallway before I reached the stairs. She'd moved fast. She was standing at the end of the corridor with her arms folded, not blocking me, just present in the way people are when they have something to say and have decided to say it. For what it's worth, she said, I told her this wasn't a good idea. I know, I said. She looked at me with an expression that was part assessment and part something older. The look of someone who has watched two people's marriage from the outside long enough to have a perspective neither of the people inside it ever asked for. You handle that well. In there. She paused. Too well, maybe. What does that mean? It means I can't tell if you're grieving or if you've just been processing this for so long that you're already out the other side. She uncrossed her arms. She's my sister. I'm going to be on her side. But she made a bad choice, and I told her that. I want you to know that. I know, I said again. And then, because it was true, I'm glad she has you. Blythe studied me for another moment. Then she nodded once. Not agreement exactly, more like the closing of a parenthesis, and walked back toward the conference room. Paul walked me to my car. He does this when he's thinking and doesn't want to say what he's thinking in an office with walls. He has a quality of discretion that I've always respected. He keeps things not by being silent, but by knowing which things don't need to be said. She's entitled to the joint accounts and the vehicle, he said. We'll work through the remaining marital property over the next few weeks. It's not complicated. No, I said. You'll be able to stay in the house. Yes. He paused at the edge of the parking lot. The morning had gone to overcast, not cold, but not warm, the kind of day that has no strong opinion about itself. Your grandfather would have called that a clean outcome. He would have said the trust did what it was supposed to do, I said. He would not have used the word clean. Paul smiled slightly. No, he wouldn't have. He looked at me. Are you all right, Owen? The question was genuine, which is why I gave it a genuine answer instead of the reflexive one. I'll get there, I said. He nodded. The rest is paperwork. I drove home in the way you drive, when you're not entirely certain what you're returning to, not lost, just in the process of recalibrating. The roads were familiar, and I let them be familiar, which is a thing you can do when a navigation is not the point. The house was quiet when I got back. There are specific qualities of quiet, and I've been learning to distinguish them. The quiet of a room where someone has recently left is different from the quiet of a room that has always been yours. The house was moving from the first kind toward the second, slowly, in the way that real things shift. I went to the back porch. The trilene was there, as it always was, doing the work it had always done, growing slightly, dropping things, existing with a particular indifference of living things that don't need you to watch them to keep going. I thought about my grandfather, as I often do out here, not with sadness, or not only with sadness. He'd been gone long enough that I'd found a way to carry him lightly, to let his presence be something in the arrangement of the land and the language of the trust documents rather than something I mourned with fresh energy every time. He'd built the clause because he believed in protecting what was worth protecting. He hadn't built it to punish anyone. He'd built it because he understood that the act of aggression is its own verdict, that someone willing to take something by force has, in the taking, revealed something about their relationship to the thing. All you have to do is not flinch, he told me. I hadn't flinched. I was not sure yet whether that was wisdom or its own kind of loss. Maybe it was both. Maybe the point of still water was never that it felt good to hold still, just that the fish came to you, eventually, and you were there to receive them. I stayed on the porch until the overcast afternoon made it clear it was going to stay overcast, and then I went inside. There was no one to make coffee for. I made it anyway, and I sat at the kitchen table with it, and I let the quiet be what it was.
Thanks for listening.